Club or country? RCB or SCG? Namibia or Yemibia? Trying to keep two very, very rich people from beating each other and everyone else senseless, this is the Guerilla Cricket Podcast.
Cricket. This is all about cricket. Guerilla cricket. Not just runs and wickets. So come and get it. Guerilla Cricket Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Guerilla Cricket Podcast. We're recording on Saturday the 16th of May 2020. 10 years to the day since England's men's T20 World Cup triumph in Bridgetown, Barbados. And less gloriously, 7 years to the day since three Rajasthan Royals bowlers, including former India international Sreesanth, were arrested in a match-fixing probe that eventually ended N. Srinivasan's reign at the top of the BCCI and ICC. Well, his first one, anyway. And it's to discuss the men's T20 World Cup and the IPL that we three meet. Who three? Well, I'm your host, Nakul Pande, here in London, and I'm joined, firstly, live from gorgeous but struggling Cape Town, by the owner and editor of Cricket Fanatics magazine, KHALID MOHIDIN. KHALID, welcome to the Guerilla Cricket Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And returning to the show, coming to us from strict lockdown in one of the world's other great cricketing cities, namely Bombay, co-founder and editor of CricTracker, ANKIT MISHRA. Welcome back, ANKIT.
Hey, thanks, Nakul. Thanks for having me.
With cricket beginning to have conversations in earnest about resuming activities, there is a problem. The biggest revenue generator in franchise cricket and the ICC's most high-profile tournament of the year are potentially competing for the same slot in the calendar. Let's start with a survey of the landscape. ANKIT, what are the current options on the table for the staging in this calendar year of 2020 of the IPL and the T20 World Cup?
Let me start with the IPL. So, inside Indian cricket, everybody's accepted the fact that we might actually not have an IPL, though they are definitely contemplating how to squeeze one in. Do we do like somewhere on a neutral venue? Do we cut down the matches and try to sneak that in? But very recently, I even read BCCI President Saurav Ganguly talk about it, and he said unless situation goes back to normal, we might actually have to do away with it. So no matter how much they wanted, like billions of dollars are at stake for the BCCI, but no matter how badly they want it, unless situation really improves, getting an IPL in is extremely difficult, especially considering the situation here in India. The spread is actually just increasing every day. We have higher number of cases. The population is not a blessing. Even if we want to stage it behind closed doors, extremely difficult. Considering a neutral venue, you still expose the players. Not like if you consider only, I just read Matthew Hayden suggested we should do an IPL with just Indian players. But even if you want to do that, you still risk a lot of players. In general, very, very risky unless you have like a vaccine or a treatment out there. Staging an IPL doesn't seem very likely.
Sorry, that's a pretty significant concession to even consider thinking about, because when we spoke a few weeks ago, kind of not when all this started, but when we first started to have to consider these things, cricket, the idea then of there not being an IPL at all was not even being publicly hinted at, let alone actually talked about by people in significant positions of power.
So this landscape has changed very drastically because the cases have increased in India. Earlier, people considered that with a lockdown, we might be able to restrict the contraction, but then it hasn't been the case, and the numbers are only increasing. The healthcare is now under pressure. All the facilities everywhere, the government's trying to revive the economy, all of that steps, but then lockdown in most major places like say Mumbai, Delhi, all the major cities in India are still extended. Even with otherwise, if there is like a release in the lockdown, there still will be a need for social distancing. But with the kind of population that we have in India and this like the landscape, the population explosion, very difficult to manage something like that. So now people are actually talking about it in the open because there is very little option left.
I think that's as good a sign of any of the times to which we've come. So that's the IPL is potentially under threat. KHALID, the T20 World Cup. Obviously, this is more of an international concern, although South African players have and other players have done very well out of the IPL. Where do we stand in terms of the more informed speculation about the T20 World Cup?
Yeah, well, there was talk obviously about having behind closed doors, etc., and all of those type of things. And obviously, FAF coming out and speaking about having the World Cup still with quarantines on both ends of the actual tournament. But I think with the amount of cases happening all around the world, and especially the major countries, I mean, obviously, ANKIT talking about India and the struggle in India, of course. To have it, I think Australia, with regards to Australia being a place that hasn't had really as many cases as the other parts of the world, they're saying, the more concern is about getting those players safely over into those countries, from their countries, respective countries, and making sure that they are screened and healthy to go there. I mean, my opinion would be to cancel it completely. I think that at the moment we have to make sure that everybody is obviously safe and healthy and is not spreading it amongst each other. I mean, South Africa is a difficult case with Corona at the moment because, I mean, yes, we've stopped the spread to stop the curve and try to prolong it. Our president did the things that he did so that he can prolong it, and so that we can also create structures or be able to formulate certain places and make sure that everybody's equipped to deal with it when it does increase, because the automatic reaction is that, or the assumption is that the curve is going to increase again and that more people are going to get infected. So it's quite tough. I think that with regards to the T20, me personally, I would cancel it. And
in terms of the IPL, I mean, we'll come on to this in the wrap up, but just to kind of set the scene, I guess I'll get you to answer each other's questions. So, KHALID, in terms of the logistics and even desirability of staging the IPL?
So for me, nothing's better than international cricket, obviously. So that's just my assumption. I think maybe from a commercial side of things, IPL, what IPL does for cricket and for cricketers in the world, is a massive income salary for a lot of the South Africans that do go there, and from people from other parts of the world. I mean, South Africa's global T20 league, for example, I don't think it's at that level yet where you can say that the players are getting enough money from it, or contracts that are big enough that can cover them or set them up for life. I mean, a guy like Chris Morris, for example, who's in and out of the South African teams, in and out of the domestic teams, for him to get $1 million contract in the IPL, it's a massive thing for him. It's a massive opportunity for him. Some of our youngsters that get picked up as well. It's amazing experience for them. So I think for me personally, desirable wise, international cricket is nothing better than that.
Yeah, obviously international cricket is still the pinnacle of the sport, although how long that will be the case for is open to question. ANKIT, we've got a pretty pessimistic picture about the T20 World Cup from KHALID. How does it look from where you're standing?
So as far as T20 World Cup is considered, the ICC is already contemplating that because they already have another one lined up next year. So they might as well, I read somewhere today, they might push it back. It pushed this one to 2022. So where we will have one in 21 and one in 22. So again, see, doing a tournament like the T20 World Cup, you are flying in players from across the world. Logistics, getting the players, the management, all of that, then you have to put them up at some place. The exposure is so high that you cannot contain their contact with people. Even if you want to keep them in isolation for 2 weeks before and after, during a match, the players, the officials, just the essential people, and at the hotel, they travel. All of that stuff, to contain all of that in such a situation is extremely difficult. And unless most countries lift travel bans and they are willing to risk their players, till the time you don't have like a vaccine, you are still risking it, right? Even if you take all the precautions in the world, you still are at risk. And I'm not very sure if India would want to risk their top players. If I'm just talking in India context, no country would actually want to do that.
For sure, and we've confronted this issue, or begun to confront this issue here in the UK with talk of the West Indies sending over a very large sort of squad plus to the UK, and a number of Caribbean cricket commentators and people involved in cricket in the Caribbean, including Guerilla Cricket's own Matchless Patrick Hewitt, host of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, have raised the question that actually, it's a huge thing to ask of people from coming from various Caribbean nations who actually have done very well to control and contain the COVID pandemic, helped by a certain amount of isolation, of course, but geographically speaking. And Michael Atherton in the Times wrote this week that that West Indies and Pakistan would be owed a huge debt of gratitude by England if they did manage to come over and tour and essentially get English cricket going again. The unspoken what if of that was whether that gratitude will actually happen from one of the world's richest boards, which remains to be seen. And in an Indian context, I saw Ravi Shastri said, I think this morning or just yesterday, that he, and again, this is probably with an India or BCCI hat on, because for those of you who don't know, the links between the BCCI and the Indian national team are far closer than the equivalent link between the ECB and the English national team. He was saying that the IPL should take precedence, and that the ICC's tournament, the thing which India don't control most of the revenues for, if we're being cynical / realistic, should be prioritized. We'll come on to what Faf said in the second half of the show, but does the fact you alluded to it? Does the fact that there is a World Cup in 2021 make it easier to do as Ravi Shastri said, and prioritize a domestic tournament in essence, although the IPL is much more than that?
So, like he said, first going to a domestic tournament is far easier. But even with the IPL, you have players coming from all different backgrounds, from all parts of India. Even if you want to do an only India IPL, if you want to get foreign players, then the largest risk is travel. The most people have got infected when they are at something like an airport. And even now in India right now, most healthcare workers and the essential services people are carrying it, and they are like infecting more people. So then you cannot travel without the airports. You need the airports, you need access to that. It is literally taking hours. The other day I was reading up, somebody traveled across the world, and they had to sit at Hong Kong airport for about 8 hours, because that's the duration you get tested. Till the time your result is not out, you're not let into the country. So if we are looking at stuff like that, if there is regulation like that in place, you cannot host multiple matches. You cannot even get players from one place to other in a matter of days. So I'm not very sure on how they plan on doing this. In a country like India, considering today, I don't see an IPL happening in 2020.
So Ravi Shastri's suggestion is somewhat typical of Ravi Shastri.
Very optimistic.
I was going to say bombastic, but yeah, Ravi Shastri banging the drum. Khalid, so I'd like to get your opinion on what if anything the fact that there is another T20 World Cup scheduled in 2021 does for this, and also on Ankit's suggestion that we might have 2021 World T20, 2022 World T20, 2023 50 over World Cup. There has already been a war of words between the BCCI and the ICC about future international tournaments. Could this get even messier than we already thought it was going to get?
Seems like it. Because I mean, for me, about World Cups, for me, it's more about the glory of a World Cup. It's the excitement of it. You want to look forward to it. I mean, if you have one every single year, it just takes the fairy tale-ness about it away from me. I feel that it needs to be something that you look forward to. Every 4 years is a nice gap. I mean, yes, we will basically, with regards to T20s, now it's going to be, like you're saying, these World Cups after each other. I mean, it takes the nostalgia away from the tournament for me, I think. And as well, when you're talking about now, when you were saying about with regards to the 2020 World Cup, and you were talking about obviously going there, and I know you want to talk about FAF in the later stages and etc. But with regards to sending so many teams, everybody obviously has to be able to get in this pandemic. Obviously, everybody needs to get tested. Who's going to pay for all that testing for every single team, every single squad member? Someone gets injured over there, then the next person needs to be tested. Travel costs, all of that, etc. Who's going to cover? Because you're now staying there extra days, obviously before the time, to make sure that you're in a safe area, etc. So you're 100% spot on with that. I think he's going to get a lot messier, and especially if the BCCI is involved and with the ICC, and that there's been a lot of fights between the two. It hasn't been covered up very well. I mean, they are quite vocal about it, and I guess if one of those parties are upset, it can get quite messy.
Yeah, Ankit, as I said, we've already seen this. Sort of Ganguly announced his intentions to basically take on the ICC before he was even appointed. I alluded to somebody who might be behind the scenes of that in my intro, but it's not difficult to see the motives potentially behind the likes of sort of Ganguly and Ravi Shastree making these sort of statements at this time.
So, to be very honest, in the order of resumption of things in India or across the world, even if I don't want it, but sport is and will be one of the last few things that will resume. Sport is not essential. It is entertainment at the end of the day, right? So, for people to risk their value, risk their life and risk everything else for a game of cricket is extremely difficult. And another factor to consider here is most players are not getting practice right now. All of them are at home, even if they have, like somebody like Virat Kohli might have a private practice, but most of the players don't. And even if you consider India, outside it becomes more difficult. And then you are expecting them from a scenario where they've not got any cricket for more than 2 months, 3 months, to then go on and play a larger tournament. They might not be physically and mentally fit to do that. That is a challenge we are not even considering. So the first stage of resumption would be where they can go and practice. Then say maybe a few matches. You cannot host a tournament with players not prepared for it. Even if I'm just talking IPL, a tournament as taxing as IPL, players go out cold and they get injured or something, whatever might happen. The first step always has to be things going back to normal enough for players to at least go out and play a few warm-up matches, practice. If they are able to manage stuff like that, even if it is for like a bunch of players, then we can talk about them traveling or anything else. But I don't see that happening, at least in the next few months. I don't know where we stand in terms of like a global release of a vaccine. But if that were to happen in the next few months, we would still be looking at few months from there. So if we stand in the middle of May right now, maybe July, August, we get like a vaccine. October, November, we might start practice. I'm trying to be as realistic as possible. Maybe by the end of this year, we start resumption of cricket somewhere.
Yeah, this isn't going to be a popular thing for anybody in the cricket media to say, but I think it's important that we take all of these factors into consideration and are realistic with our prognoses and what we're putting out into the world. I mean, as far as a vaccine is concerned, I think where we functionally stand with regards to a global vaccine is nowhere, because we're not close to that actually being a practical reality. I've alluded to a couple of times. We were going to talk about this later, but let's talk about it now. The sexiest man in cricket, Faf du Plessis, was talking to Bangladesh ODI captain Tamim Iqbal this week in a live chat, and he suggested, with the sort of typical Faf forward-thinking qualities. I mean, he's not captain anymore, but he's still thinking strategically of hosting the T20 World Cup with a 2-week quarantine window either side of the tournament. So that's the whole thing lasting about 6 weeks if you include the what is essentially a qualifying tournament at the start of it, which the ICC are trying to put forward as the first group stage. KHALID, that you've spoken to and met Faf a few times. This sort of quite fully fleshed out idea is not unusual for Faf.
Most optimistic person in the world, really, seriously. That's one of the most optimistic cricketer I've met. He's always trying to look for a solution and always trying to think of the positives in everything. There are some incredible person, incredible man, incredible cricketer, I feel. Sometimes very underappreciated. I mean, when his captaincy was was questioned a lot by the fans, and us running a fan channel, we can see that right hand. We can see that right in front of us. We can see those comments coming in when people were saying that he needs to let go of the captaincy, etc. And how positive he remained through all of that, and how he's always put the country with regards to that. He said he wants to play and he wants to play for the country, etc. And be first. But now my concern about this is especially the poorer countries. If they're going to go with this type of mentality, then it has to be a lot of testing that has to take place, and who's going to cover those costs? I know CSA is in massive debt. I don't know if they're going to be able to get every single player the vaccine. That is still going to take their own money out to their pockets. They don't have IPL contracts for them. Where's the money going to come from for the vaccine? So it's a side joke. But I mean, with regards to what you said, Ankit, which I want to add on a little bit, is the fact about training and also about getting prepared for a world tournament like the World Cup. South Africa particularly hasn't played enough T20 cricket now in this last year to be able to even, I don't think they even know what their T20 squad will be. They're still juggling between whether they should bring AB back or not bring AB back. They're still juggling between what their best 11 is. We don't even know. So where's the time for us? West Indies was supposed to be a massive tour for us to understand where we are and where we stand with regards to the personnel alone. I mean, then how do we prepare for a tournament like that? And generally speaking, you normally have you can't really use the IPL as practice because it's not the same level. Because first of all, not all of our players are going to play in the IPL. There's a lot of players that are probably not going to have contracts, that are not going to have time to practice before the international event. So injuries, that's a massive thing. Injuries also cost a lot, especially if you get a bad injury. And so with regards to the thinking of Faf, yes, optimistic, but I think it's a little flawed. I think he's not thinking about the fact that how much it's going to cost to us to get South African team over there. I mean, there are poorer countries as well that won't be able to, that have to get themselves ready for India as well, and have to also do all the testing. You have to make sure that you don't have the virus first and foremost, and those tests are expensive, dependable on where you stay. And also with regards to our home keeping fit, I've spoken to quite a few guys on our lockdown series. So we have episodes on our lockdown series. You can go check it. And some of the guys that we've spoken to, some of them don't have big yards. They don't have places where they can run up and down and keep fit to the level that they need to be fit and keep their cricket skills sharp is the important thing. Some guys have very expensive apartments, but they don't have a massive yard or garden. Plus the restrictions in South Africa, you only can train between 6 and 9. So that's the only training you really get in. And with regards to mingling with each other, you can't really do that either. So where are you going to get that cricket exposure and that cricket practice? And now with the IPL, most likely not that bad able to happen. T20 cricket, South Africans are not going to play a lot of T20 cricket. So it's a proper problem, I think.
Yeah, some of the nations who are taking part in the T20 World Cup. So you have all of the full member nations bar Zimbabwe, but even within that, you got Pakistan, which has well-noted infrastructure issues. Afghanistan, which is a reasonable, I would say, a major cricketing power, but certainly as a nation is not in a good place and has not been for as long as it has existed. Papua New Guinea, Oman, Namibia, and then you've got nations in the Western world, in the more economically developed parts of the world, but where the cricketing infrastructure isn't in place. The Netherlands, Ireland, and Scotland, all of which actually do have, in normal times, very good cricketing infrastructure, but they are not well funded by the ICC. Ireland, in particular, we spoke to Warren Dutram, the CEO of Cricket Ireland, a few weeks ago, and he already has personally had to bail out Cricket Ireland since they became a full member. They've had their entire fixture list cancelled for this summer. Kind of interesting. You raised the point of who's going to fund the testing. Firstly, whether you can morally justify having the amount of testing that's going to have to happen for 16, 15 member player squads, plus support staff, plus ancillary staff, plus staff at the grounds, plus broadcasting crews. I think I remember seeing that it takes, even behind closed doors, it takes about 200 people to put on a major sporting event, and you're going to have to test them, if not daily, certainly weekly. And that's more testing, it seems to me, than can be morally justified. Now, whether those questions will be taken seriously, given the money involved, is another question. But it would seem, even by the standards of the Big Three legacy era ICC, in which we who currently run the game, it would seem callous for the ICC not to help member boards fund that themselves. The idea of member boards having to fund testing of their own players is, I think, would be almost criminal.
Yeah.
But sorry, Ankit. Just before we come to that, your thoughts of FAF's 2-week quarantine window.
Like you said, even if we were to consider that the quarantine window would work, then you are talking about testing 200 people at least on an alternate day basis. You cannot leave that to a week. One of them gets infected and all of them are infected. I recently read somewhere one of the people working in a factory, he was infected. He was actually infected. They did not take care of it, and he potentially infected 600 other people working in the same place. So that is how bad it can get. This is like a spiral effect. So unless you test people on a daily basis, you cannot think of it. And now with the economic situation for every country, like not just India, everybody's struggling. There's no business. Like all of the economies are struggling. In that sort of a scenario, you are trying to put pressure on everybody else for a sport. Now, how do you justify that? Even if, I don't think the possibility of cricket resuming unless everything else is resumed. Like I said, this comes very late in the order of resumption. The industry is not functioning in a country like India. Maybe people are working from home, but that is to a certain extent. There are industries that need people to work from there. There's no travel. So unless you have everything resumed in full capacity, you won't be looking at cricket. And at the end of the day, for a country like India, BCCI gets all of that money. The Indian government does. So for them to organize all of that, like all of the fluff for them, to give them the facility to organize testing and all of that, with limited resources and restrictions, that is not going to happen.
Yeah, to put some context behind what Ankit just said, there's been a battle over the BCCI's tax-exempt status for some time, but that has not yet been resolved. And while the the Indian government does get a significant, I was going to say propaganda, but no, I'm going to go with that propaganda and world status boost from the success of the Indian cricket team, and it is a tool that the current Indian government under Narendra Modi has used to enhance its reputation around the world in a similar way that we see other cases of what has been dubbed sport washing around the world. The Indian government doesn't directly financially benefit, and so the direct financial benefactors would be the BCCI, which is why they and their high-profile representatives, such as sort of Ganguly and Ravi Shastri, are pushing it. We will talk about what potential hope there might be on the horizon, and where we think that this might all be resolved, and how after the break. But first, we'll have a short musical interlude in which we'll politely request your money to secure our ongoing existence.
Alternative cricket commentary, bringing you laughs, bringing you jingles, bringing you joy. We are Gorillas. We need your patreon.com/Guerilla Cricket.
Welcome back to the Guerilla Cricket Podcast with me, Nakul Pande, owner and editor of South African publication Cricket Fanatics magazine, KHALID MOHIDIN, and co-founder and editor of our partners CricTracker, ANKIT MISHRA. We're discussing the looming schedule stramash between the IPL and the men's T20 World Cup and how we might resolve it. We've talked about the current options on the table. We've talked about the rather pessimistic looking picture in terms of hosting major tournaments, whether within one country with domestic teams or whether an international tournament. And we've talked about Faf du Plessis' potential solution for having a T20 World Cup with a 2-week quarantine window. We will devote the second half of the podcast to talking about the major question and the crux of all of this issue. So we'll go around the room, starting with you, Ankit. So the scenarios on the table are: both tournaments take place either in 2020 or sort of postponed into the 2020-2021 season. One tournament take place, if so, which one, or none? And then it's a slightly complicated structured question. So there's kind of two parts. Which is most likely and which is most desirable? Because given the financial incentives involved, and I know you say that sport is not a priority, but for a lot of people who are financially involved with cricket, it is. And in India in particular, well, yes, all of us. I meant more financially involved, but yeah, for all of us, those who pull the levers of power, cricket is an industry in India, and it's a major industry in India. So there may be a push to do things that might not necessarily be desirable in the interest of protecting those financial positions. So both tournaments, one or none.
For 2020, I would say at best we could have a T20 World Cup, that towards the end of the year. If that, I'm saying, being very optimistic, if things go back to normal, then we have the T20 World Cup. For the IPL, another challenge that we need to consider is, even if there's a lot of money involved and a lot of key players at stake, who has the money to spend it on advertising in that? The biggest revenue for the BCCI is brands tying up with the tournament. If they do have a longer contract with a few, but then you would not have regular spends on advertising. Most of them would want to pull out right now, because even larger corporations are right now struggling to sustain. For them to then pull out crores of rupees to just fund their marketing on the IPL, where they are not sure if it will create any impact on the output, then that money is in doubt. With that in doubt, you are not sure of what people are not going to be in the stadium, so there's no stadium money. All the money you can make is through advertisement, and that too on the broadcast, the television and stream. Then you're talking about, it becomes very difficult because it's extremely complex. You have a lot of factors to involve. You need a government's approval, you need their security, you need their travel, you need the infrastructure. State-wise, extremely difficult to get there. Across states in India, there are different governments. The situation is different. Somebody might favor it, but somebody might not. And even if the central government wants to do it, there are states run by opposition governments which will totally deny it.
Yeah, we've had a few state chief ministers right at the very start of all this, I think in Maharashtra and I think in Rajasthan as well, essentially denying access to the IPL when it looked like it might go ahead in April.
So even I'm sorry to interrupt, but even in a general circumstance, because IPL runs through the summer in India, in states like Maharashtra, where it is extremely harsh, we've had activists actually asking the government to not waste water on putting it on stadiums because people don't have access to water. So now we are not even talking water, we are talking about life. We are talking about access to healthcare. So if you want to privilege the players over normal people, then how do you justify that?
Yeah, that was a big thing a few years ago. Some games got moved out of Maharashtra when there was a major water crisis in India. And actually, just on that point, KHALID, this became a live issue in Cape Town a few years ago when there was a test match going on when Cape Town was having its quite significant drought. So it's not unforeseeable that there is the infrastructure challenges that this pandemic is going to cause will harden even people who would be in favor of sport returning against it.
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, obviously, with all the domestic cricket that was cancelled, club cricket was cancelled. So you couldn't watch. I mean, South Africa needs that, especially with the heat as well in the country. You need that moisture for the pitches, etc. Okay, some stadiums had boreholes, etc. Like Newlands had a very good borehole, etc. But I mean, even then, restrictions were crazy. So I agree with you. And obviously, talking about, I agree 100% with Ankit, but I would, if I had to choose between this, I would go completely, maybe 2021, if I was going to be realistic, because I mean, with other than the IPL, who else does it benefit? So besides the players that are playing from overseas, I don't see any of our countries benefiting from it. I know that CSA in themselves going to have to put recoveries in place because sponsors, etc. We've already lost a major sponsor in Standard Bank. So now finding a new sponsor during this period, getting the enough game time as well over the next time. I don't think we'll be near ready for 2020, and I don't think we'll even be, our players won't even be ready for the IPL. Guys to get fit. And when you're talking about the IPL, it's only a handful of players that will be part of that squad. So to get us ready for 2020, I think it's almost impossible. So I'm only going to talk from a South African point of view with regards to that. And I think 2020 is more likely than having anything.
So you would see the calendar year of 2020 in terms of the two major competitions that we're talking about, and there is bilateral cricket to consider as well, but that's for another podcast. You would see the calendar year of 2020 as essentially a write-off.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, I think that there's too much risk involved, especially for South Africans. I think there's way too much risk involved with regards to us continuing cricket or continuing sport during this period. I think that the interactions with people from the township, I mean, you can see already without restrictions, if one person, like one cashier or one person in a supermarket gets coronavirus, and is tested positive for coronavirus, the whole shopping center closes down until the whole place is disinfected, etc. Because they know the risk. If it gets into townships like Langa, if it gets into KHALID, if it gets into Mitchell's Plain, where there's 300, 400,000 people, I mean, one person in that area can't afford to go for testing, can't afford to get checked even if they have it. And another thing that we haven't discussed is the underlying health issues. People that have underlying health issues that are going to be affected by this. There are cricketers that maybe have diabetes, etc., that can be affected majorly by this. And if they can't make it into the World Cup squad, or because of those reasons, because the risk for them is way too high. So I think there's too much risk involved with that, especially when we don't know and we're not even close to getting a vaccine. We don't even know what causes it exactly, besides the fact that we can just keep, based on other flu strands of before, we're using the same basically regurgitated information to kind of keep ourselves safe, but we don't know exactly how fast it's going to spread and how fast it's going to travel, etc. And who has it and who doesn't. We saw an incident with Idris Alba. I know I'm using a crazy example, but Idris Alba had the coronavirus, him and his daughter didn't show any signs. Without the money to be able to go get tested, they would never known. So for reasons like that alone, I feel like it's too much of a risk, especially for the poorer countries that can't afford it, whose boards can't afford to inject a lot of money into the infrastructure to get those things in place.
Yeah, and I think that again, we talked about this in the first half of the podcast, but it is an indication of the severity and the scope of the situation in which we find ourselves. That I've sounded a few times like I might have been defending the BCCI's and the ICC's position in terms of getting the tournament going, but despite all these financial pressures. And we've talked about this a little bit with the ECB in terms of staging of tournaments like the T20 Blast and the postponement of the 100. I'm not at all, but I'm interested in cricket governance, and if you're even slightly interested in cricket governance, you have to be aware that money talks, and the power that money brings talks, and the stranglehold that the powerful boards have over the rest of the game, given the ICC's structure as not really a governing body, are realities that we all have to consider when we consider cricket on a macro level. But even with all those pressures, and even with all those pressures from broadcasters to fulfill their contracts with boards, even with all the pressures from sponsors to recoup their marketing spend, we are still in a situation where, balancing all that against the risks that you, Khalid, have so eloquently stated, we are probably going to be in a situation where it's going to be a long time before cricket returns to anything like normal. We could go on for hours, and people paid to do so will, But that's all we've got time for in this week's Guerilla Cricket podcast. Thank you very much for your insight and your time to owner and editor of Cricket Fanatics magazine, KHALID MOHIDIN.
Hey guys, thanks.
And co-founder and editor of CricTracker, ANKIT MISHRA.
It's a great discussion. Pleasure to be here.
And special thanks as ever to our West Yorkshire wizard, editor and producer, John Stone. Remember, if you sign up as a patron at any donation level at patreon.com/Guerilla Cricket, you get our podcast before anybody else. That's a lot of podcasts now, as well as this show. We've got our county cricket and book review show, Guerilla, hosted by Tony Bishop, which returned this week with an excellent interview with author Anindya Datta about his new book, Wizards, the Story of Indian Spin Bowling. You also get the occasional stream of consciousness stylings of the alternative Guerilla Cricket podcast. But nobody gets denied for want of funds at GC. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Acast, and Podbean, so please download, share, and subscribe. Those of you who are listening on iTunes in particular, please leave us a review and a 5-star rating so more people can find the show. We'll be back with another edition of Guerilla Origin Stories next week, then another big feature the week after, then back to Origin Stories, and so on and so on. In between times, join us for more Dick Well Abroad Alzat Trophy action, and please, if you can, give generously to our Just Giving appeal to raise money for ourselves and the excellent people at the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. That link is pinned to our Twitter feed, Facebook page, and Instagram bio. But until then, be safe, be as happy as can be. Bye-bye.